him being a physician first and foremost, but also someone who's battled, the darkest of evil forces.
Van Helsing is a pretty classic Dracula character. What makes this version unique?
There have been a lot of different iterations of the Van Helsing character. Um, so we find in this version, it's many years after Dracula, and he's now in a strange land. He's in the United States, and he now can be gotten to because he's got a wife and he has two sons. So there's a vulnerability, but this is a guy who's kind of, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, right? He's seen too much, done too much, and now he's discovered that this malevolent evil has followed him. And so there's a my interpretation. I felt that, in Joe Hill's story, and certainly Natasha's adaptation of the story in the script, that it was on the page that he was a different guy, right? It wasn't leaning into a lot of the stuff of Stoker's book, or any other iterations that have come since then. That to find him, I wanted him to be, him being a physician first and foremost, but also someone who's battled, the darkest of evil forces. That as an academic and a physician, that he would need to find some way to heal himself, instead he would sort of, and what would that look like? And so I thought, well, at that time he'd become a practitioner of Stoicism, right? And so, and that way it informed and allowed for me, in the sense of the performance, that it really informed all of the way that he spoke, the way that he moved, his lack of movement, the Stoicism. But at the core of it, what was important in this interpretation was that, because we've not seen him before as a family man, that through that veneer of Stoicism, that we see his genuine affection, right?
Yeah.
um and it had to be very, very subtle and minuscule, because otherwise it wouldn't work. But also, without any display of that, then the audience just goes, well, he's gone off the fucking rails, and that's just sort of the nature of the whole thing. And
Yeah.
he's kind of, these poor kids, where when in fact what he's really doing is he's trying to prepare them, right? If you want to be analogous, he's, in the same way that, as a parent, I recognize that, to navigate all the shit that's going on, that has gone on and continues to go on, and now seems to be at a heightened level of anxiety. And so how you navigate that and maintain your dignity and your sanity and your security. And I think that's, those were a lot of the things that I was thinking about and discussed with Natasha when we were getting ready to work.
Aspect ratio wise, the way the film's shot, it really fits in well with the era
Mm.
of when the movie is based in. So maybe what are some like little tricks or things that you did editing, filming that kind of the whole time I'm thinking this really does fit in great with like the aesthetic and the vibe. So what are maybe some of the tricks that went into that?
Yeah, it's so funny. The original Dracula, the 30s Dracula was filmed in California, so there's a nice little overlap there. Actually, I think very close to Simi Valley, where we filmed. Um, yeah, I mean, we really wanted to create something that felt a little bit different, so that the audience would be sort of transported to a very different, the story is grounded, but the world should be heightened and fun and different. So the 4:3 aspect ratio was something we wanted to play with from the beginning. We felt it was a lot more intimate way, just like really putting the characters front and center. And it
Mhm.
had sort of this vertical nature to it that would really suit the house. And then when we're outside, feel quite oppressive, right? So you're kind of like faced with this immense sky that just like this unending California sun beating down on us. So it felt very right for us, and luckily the producers were game. We also used vintage lenses and spherical lenses and all sorts of fun ways to make it feel a little bit older than it. Obviously we're shooting in 2024, so that was definitely part of the intent.
So, when it came to your initial idea for the short story, what element of the world of Dracula were you most excited about expanding upon?
Oh, well, for me, okay, my whole relationship with Dracula has been messed up since the beginning. I've always had the wrong take on the story because before I read Stoker's Dracula, when I was about 13, I read a book called The Dracula Tapes by Fred Saberhagen. People don't really remember Fred all that well nowadays, and I don't think that book is still in print. But but the Dracula tapes retold the story of Stoker's Dracula from the point of view of Count Dracula. And it turns out he's the hero, and that Van Helsing is a disturbed fanatic who doesn't really understand vampires and doesn't really understand science and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I loved that book. I mean, I was 13. I just loved it. And then I read Stoker's Dracula, and I was totally baffled, because I'm like, no, this is all lies and propaganda. This isn't what happened, So I always going back to the beginning, I've always had a pretty skeptical view of Van Helsing. And look, would you hang out with a guy who spends every Friday night skulking around cemeteries, tearing open coffins, ramming stakes through the heart of, someone lying at rest there, then chopping off her head and stuffing garlic into the mouth, you know?
No, I would not. Yeah.
I mean, it's not a great way to spend your Friday night. It's pretty troubling.
Yeah.
We have Van Helsing says he has to do it, has to do it to protect us. But think about how many bullies and abusers say, I had to do this to protect you. I'm doing this for your own good. Look what you made me do. Which he actually says in the film. I
Yeah.
find that kind of chilling. Van Helsing, our whole picture of Van Helsing, we take it for granted he's a hero. But when you look close at his profile, I don't know, he also sounds like a paranoid.
Yeah.
A dangerous paranoid. So that's what I wanted to explore, the possibility that the things we think we know about him aren't true. And sorry, I'm just blabbing on. Sorry,
No, that's great.
and in some ways, everyone can relate to the story. Hopefully, you didn't have a father like Van Helsing. I didn't. Hopefully, you had a relatively lovely and wonderful father. But there is a time in everyone's life. When you're a kid, you believe everything your father tells you. You believe everything your mother tells you. But then you get to an age when you start to question their beliefs, and you start to say, wait a minute, is that thing they've always told me? Is that true? Maybe that's
Right.
not true. And so in that sense, everyone is born into a mystery story. And the mystery is, who are my parents? And gradually you find out.
Jocelyn, I'm gonna start with you. I feel like when watching the movie, you're kind of isolated in a way because you're the one that's like haunted, for lack of a better term. What was that like, just like as an actress, the approach every day where you're almost on your own like plane, it feels like while watching.
Yeah, I think haunted is the word. Mina's psychological state is pretty diminished when we meet her, and then it's only declines from there. She's been dealing with the trauma of the attack from Count Dracula 20 years ago. She's on an isolated farmhouse with her overbearing husband and her kids that she loves and wants to protect, but she is dealing with, not only PTSD, but has a chronic blood infection, so she's weak. She's kind of trying to see through the fog of all these issues that she's going through. And yeah, she is kind of on her own in terms of she's having a hard time connecting, but at the same time, I think as she's getting closer to death, she has some clarity and is trying to reach out, especially to Max.
Brady, I'll shift over to you. As kind of the central figure as the oldest son, I feel like you're being pulled in different directions, but you're kind of portrayed as having a good heart. My question is like, what was it like navigating being, I would argue, the film's most complicated character?
I mean, you really have to take them in steps and every day with the scenes that you're filming, because you have, first off, you have Max, who's this like good soldier character who looks up to his father, and is everything his father has told him he takes as law. And you have to navigate him finding out that what Abraham's really saying isn't true. So now he's trying to figure out who he is as a person, and try to take his views on what's happening around him more personal rather than letting somebody control him. Now you have his mother who has passed. So now he's also dealing with that trauma. And then when Abraham really starts cracking and really just starts becoming this psychopath, now he almost has to become this parental role to Rudy to make sure that his innocence is protected and doesn't turn into the monster that his father is. So there's a lot of different paths that Max has to take on all at once. And so it was really fun creating that character.